Welcome to All the Things, a podcast for moms seeking an inspired life. Hi, I'm your host, Lisa Chin. I am a writer and a coach, and my most passionate truth is that the world needs the real you. That's why I created this podcast, to discover all the things that make us who we are. Because the better we understand ourselves, the more good we can do in the world. So, let's do that together. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the final episode of season 1 of All the Things. And it's kind of bittersweet, this episode, for a couple of different reasons, but I'm very excited to have Audrey on today. And Audrey Ensor is a digital content creator. Her main focus is videography and editing. She also has experience with photography, social media, animation, and graphic design. She works as a freelancer, and she also has worked at Medfield TV, where she has been the sole editor of season 1's episodes of All the Things. So Audrey, I am so excited to have you on today.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to flip the script and interview you this time.
Yes, and that is actually what most of this interview will be, flipping the script. And first, before I get started, I'll just acknowledge that we are speaking and podcasting from the native and unceded territory of the Nipmuc and the Massachusetts tribes, and I share land acknowledgement before every episode. This one is particularly significant, it being kind of the last, and it just feels very final, although it's not, for the season. But also, Audrey and I share this land. We both live in Medfield, and it is just important to remember what connects us. So first, before Audrey interviews me, I thought I would get Audrey's thoughts, because, I do think I have a few friends who have listened to maybe almost all the episodes, but for a fact you have, because you've actually, edited them. I wanted to kind of get your thoughts on how it was taking in this information, and I think from a creative standpoint too, because you were there in the beginning when I was thinking, like, I want to do a podcast, and you were like, well, we can edit it for you. And then now you're here. And so you've kind of seen the whole journey of it. I'd love to hear kind of what you've gained or what you've observed from this development of the podcast.
Sure. So I love editing this podcast because it's not something that's boring to listen to. And especially since the episodes are like around an hour each, it's like something that I actually enjoy working on. And I think what I've gained from it is that it's so different editing a podcast compared to like a video interview, because the podcast is supposed to be just a conversation and you're not really supposed to cut anything out. It's supposed to be like real and raw. And so all I really do is like adjust the volume and like the audio levels, and then cut out like any extended period of children entering the room and like maybe a couple like longer pauses than necessary, and definitely like cutting out a lot of filler words. So that's really my end of it. And like what you hear is just the genuine conversation, which is so great. And I think, the podcast is geared towards moms, but I'm not a mom and I get so much from it. It is inspiring. And I've been able to listen and learn from people's experiences. Every episode brings something different to the table. So I love hearing from different guests and getting different perspectives from people, and hearing something that they can really truly speak towards and like are passionate about has been very inspiring for me.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think I'll hand the reins over to you then.
Sure. I'm better at asking questions than I am at answering them. So I guess my first question is just, why a podcast? What inspired you to start a podcast specifically, rather than, I know you already have like your own blog, but you could have just taken like all the things and turned it into another blog. But what made you think podcast, and like maybe what other podcasts inspire you to create this one?
That's a great question. There are a few different angles from it. One is that I probably before pre-pandemic, when I had a little bit more free time to myself, I was listening to podcasts all the time. When I was commuting to work, I mean, if I had it back way earlier on in my career, instead I was like reading like electronic books, ebooks. But I would listen to podcasts any free moment I got. So this around 8 years ago was when I had an idea to have a podcast. And I have gone through iterations. I was kind of cleaning my desk today, and I have notes. I have interviews completed from 2018, and still had the notes with intentions of at some point I will publish these show notes. And I have always wanted to have one. As soon as I heard about podcasts, I've always wanted to have one. The other thing is I would go to I go to a lot of like holistic practitioners. And I just ask questions. I usually, a lot of people during treatments, they kind of stay quiet or whatever and kind of want to zone out. And I'm like, I want to know what you're doing. I want to know like why these things are happening to me or like why you're putting this needle for acupuncture in this position. And they would tell me things. And there were multiple times where, oh, many, many times where I'm like, people need to know this. So that's why. That's why I had my podcast, because people need to know things that is not just from me. It's like all these resources and people that I've come to know over the years and people that I will get to know and people that are out there that I have yet to know that have this amazing knowledge and people just need to know.
Definitely. I agree. So season 1 revolves around people you know. So what made you decide to start off your initial season with just interviewing people that you actually know?
It seemed like the most natural place to start. As I was going through the process, I was thinking about I didn't wasn't really thinking about the topics that I wanted to feature. I was thinking about, "Oh, I know this person, they'd be great, or this person would be great, and I love the angle that they would have." And it just so happened that I was trying to figure out this umbrella, like, because I want to do the podcast by seasons because I just work better in sprints, and that's how I view this season. And then I thought, well, I have to have a theme because that's just the way my brain is. When I was looking at just the various people, I thought, if this is the first season, people don't really know me, and this would be a way for them to get to know me as well as the guests. And so that's kind of how I came to that idea.
I'm curious as to what your process was for selecting out of your wide range of people you know. You selected what, maybe 8 or so who were featured on the podcast. So I'm wondering how you select a certain friend, and then also like what about them makes you decide what you're going to discuss with them, because every person has multiple special things that they have about them or what they do that they could speak towards. But each episode does, as you said, revolve like kind of around a theme. So what is your way about going about selecting a guest and then what the theme of their episode will be?
So the people that I chose were people that I enjoyed talking to. And I find almost everyone interesting on some level. So it would have been really hard for me to just start off with like a big just looking at like my entire list of people that I know. But it just so happened that the few months leading up to it, these are probably the people I talk to the most. And so as I'm thinking about doing the podcast, they just happen to kind of be right there. And for instance, like Jean, I've only met her before the podcast. I had met her maybe once or twice. We had talked before, but I knew I wanted to talk to her and I wanted to feature her because she just had a voice that, our town specifically really need to hear from. I'm talking about Jean Minio for those who don't know. That's the first interview episode, I believe. And then I was just playing around too. I wasn't really attached to the idea of like, oh, this is because it's not going to be the final season. So it's not like these are the only people that I'll feature ever. But, like Jonathan Roberts and I have talked probably once a month over the past 7 or 8 months because of the program that we met. Taim and I speak every week. Regina, I've seen her, like we were part of a accountability group where we met weekly, and then I had seen her, here and there as a client, and then Cindy's a friend. So it just was people who are like in my circle immediately, and then just kind of seeing if people wanted to also be interviewed. I think that was another thing, like understanding that not everyone wants to be on a podcast and not everyone wants to kind of put themselves out there in that way. And so it was looking at the people I know and then seeing what the level of comfort would be, and then and then knowing that everyone has something different to offer. Because even though, like, for instance, Taima and Regina both talk about money, but in very, very different ways. So there's never, like, even if I had a season where there were 10 acupuncturists, every single person would have a completely different approach. And that's the beauty of just people in general.
Yeah, definitely. And I think something so important about interviewing someone is making them feel comfortable. And if the host is also comfortable with the person they're speaking to, it's so important to have like a conversation where you feel open and vulnerable and able to speak to what you want to speak about. And, you know, there's also the opposite of that, where you want to kind of push people out of their comfort zone to talk about other things, which brings me to my next question is, you end each episode by asking a guest what is one thing that they know to be true. And that is a very tough question. And I've been impressed by all the answers so far. But are there any responses that you got to that question during season 1 that have really stuck with you?
Mm, I think that everyone's answers, and I can't recall all of them at the moment, but I know kind of the themes for everybody, that it those people live and breathe those truths. So at the end of the day, it's not surprising. It's just nice when they're able to share it, because I think that people live and breathe their truths in general. Like, that's what we do. But to be actually aware of it is a whole nother thing. So I wouldn't say that any of them have been surprising. I mean, people being artists and creatives, knowing that there's a purpose, on the planet, um, that you're worth something. Like, all the truths are ones that I would align with as well. I don't think that any have surprised me. I think they've all kind of stuck with me on some level. But I would say that, what has been most significant is the fact that these people live and breathe those truths every day. And I think that everyone should be aware that we all have those beliefs within us. And it's not just one thing that's true, it's multiple things. Um, and that even if you couldn't answer that question on the spot, w- it's within you.
Definitely. So, All the Things, as you say in your intro, is a podcast for moms seeking an inspired life. And like I said in the beginning, I'm not a mom, but I find a bunch of inspiration from it. And I've loved listening and editing. And I think that your podcast isn't only for moms. So, would you speak to how your podcast is also relatable to a broader audience, especially in regard to the content you covered in season 1?
Mm, yes. It was I teeter back and forth between, am I speaking to moms? Am I not speaking to moms? The thing is, uh, we all kind of have to choose a lane when we're trying to make an impact. And some people may choose a broader audience, and like Oprah, she can choose a big audience because she has a really wide breadth. Right now, I'm choosing moms because that's kind of what I'm living and breathing every day, and what I know kind of to be true. The thing is, it's true. Like, you can gain value from any episode of the podcast, whether you are a mom or even if you identify as a woman. I mean, I think that truths are universal. Um, Perspectives are always valuable, no matter who they are. And it is a matter of just being open to it. And so, like, I listen to different podcasts, and one of them is one specifically for creatives, like artists and things like that. And I wouldn't consider myself an artist in that way where I'm using Photoshop or anything like that. But I get so much value from that podcast because it's just, even just the pure energy. It's creative pep talk. It's like the pure energy of the host. It cheers me up, and there's at least one or two things I get from every single episode, whether or not he's talking about something that's even relevant. And that's the important thing about when we are taking in content, is that we don't just stay in our bubbles, but we actually venture outside of them, because that's where innovation happens. The innovation happens when we're actually looking at the industries and other perspectives, and then integrating it into our own, and then kind of making it our own.
And so the value you bring to your audience is centered around, a journey of self-identity and then also living an inspired life. And I can't help to think that it also brought similar value to you making this podcast. So what have you discovered about yourself during season 1, whether it's talking to guests or doing your solo episodes, or even just within the creation process?
Yes. Everything that I do is I'm very much in the journey along with the audience. Like you kind of pointed out, living an inspired life is very much creating a podcast without any sort of real goal, but feeling called to create, and so I'm creating. And some of the things I learned, solo episodes are hard. And that was what I learned.
Talking to
Is
yourself.
talking to myself, and see, about 5 or 6 years ago, I ran a summit and I interviewed over 40 people for it. So I kind of have a little bit of practice interviewing other people, but talking by myself to a mic, and I like to kind of talk off the cuff, and it just wasn't, the first couple episodes, where I think it was just a trailer even. I must have recorded myself 20 times. And there's this one time I was in spring track in high school, and I really want to try the hurdles at one point, even though the hurdles are like half my height. And I ran and I jumped over it one time, and then I spent the rest of the afternoon jumping and stopping right at the hurdle. And that is what recording solo episodes felt like to me. It was just like hit record, I like went full speed, and I'm like, oh no, I don't like this. So I did that a bunch of times. And then it was a real like practice. It like really challenged me to deal with imperfection and being okay with the fact that I will say the ums, and that I don't have to have it all kind of crafted. I think that, you can certainly go that route. And I was talking to someone who was thinking of starting a podcast, and he said, your intro sounds like very different than like the intro to the podcast, with the music and all that. Sounds different than like kind of the rest. Are you using a different mic or something? I'm like, no, I'm reading in the intro. So maybe that's the difference, is that even the tonality. But my goal was to keep it kind of raw and real. And so having conversations that are not as scripted, and even like those solo episodes that are not scripted, is what I want to offer, is because there's so much like, it's not fake, right? Because it's scripted and they're trying to be real. But if you're having a conversation with a friend, they're not reading off a script, or they don't even have an outline. They're kind of just, if I'm in a conversation with a friend, I'll ask questions as things come up, and go with the flow. And I think we need a little bit more of that, because we need to remember and remind ourselves that we don't need to have everything kind of polished and clean. And that's just kind of, I would say that's my brand, but that's kind of how I believe things. That's the value that I can provide on that end.
Definitely. And what do you think the value is to your audience when they get to like listen in almost to what feels like a private conversation? Because it does feel like you're sitting in the room with you and whoever you're interviewing, or even during your solo episodes, it feels like you're talking directly to your audience. So what do you think the value people get from that is?
I'd be curious to what like actual listeners have to say, aside from you. but what I would hope for them to get is for them to, especially because this first episode is people I know, so a lot of them are friends, is that it's like fun, and like there's opportunity to learn from our friends and ask them actually like real questions, and to be curious about who they are on a deeper level, because I'm really bad at small talk. I want to kind of get right to it, and like I want to get to know the person and know what you're talking about, and get really deep and understand your purpose and what you want to pursue and what you want to achieve in life and all that stuff. And it's hard as moms. Like we're time stretched. And this is one particular point of the creation of this podcast, where it really is targeted for moms in that sense, because many of us, I can't say everyone, right, but many moms just are time starved, and they lack the time to really get in depth in conversation, and usually it's over text, and sometimes it's in crises. It's not like, oh, we're trying to connect in like before the fact and all of that. So it is really important for me to kind of hopefully model that these opportunities exist. And if you really want to have conversations and real connection, that it's possible. And for those of my friends and people that I know who are talking to me, they're like, I've never had any deep conversations with you. It's like, I know, like, like I'm time starved too, and and that's something like I welcome like those conversations. I'm really bad at small talk, so if anyone were to ever contact me and be like, let's get right into it, I'm like, yes, let's do it.
What specific episodes would you say would be the ones you would recommend to a new listener if they haven't listened to the whole season and they want to get a flavor of what you do? What would be a good episode for them, just like rather than starting from the beginning, right? But
Yeah.
like one episode that kind of encompasses what all the things is all about.
Mm. You know, Tiffany York. That episode has had more listens than all the other ones, and I don't know why. Like she doesn't have. I don't think she like shared it with every single person she knows or whatnot. We have some mutual friends from college, but it's been listened to almost twice as much as the other episodes, and I think it's because people possibly might be sharing it. The title of the episode is "Rupture and Repair" with Tiffany York, and it was I think episode like 10 or 11 maybe. Um, that episode, it is just, it felt different. It felt like a different kind of episode. I remember getting off of that, and you probably actually watched when it ended, and we're like, I was just like, whoa, it was not where I thought I was going to take it. Rupture and repair was not the topic that I thought we were going to talk about. She and I had kind of not a falling out, but a rupture in more of our adult years, I guess. And it was real raw conversation. And it was also just really beautiful because it shows kind of the cycle of relationship, and it shows how we can come in and out of our lives, of each other's lives as adults. And then it also goes into our work in social justice and all of that too. So it kind of covered a lot of ground in those 60 minutes. So I would say start with that one. And then I would say that Regina's episode is another favorite of mine. And just in that, the way that she approaches money is so different. And I feel like everyone should, that would change anyone's life if they listen to that episode.
Yeah. So there's something to be said about how you title an episode. People will click on it depending on what the title is. If they don't know you and they don't want to listen to everything, they might just decide to click on it just because the title is intriguing. How do you go about choosing a title for an episode?
I usually am writing up the show notes and I re-listen to the episode, and certain things will call out to me, and I want to make sure that it serves the guest, make sure it's like it's appropriate for them, and also it serves the audience, because I don't want it, there's a lot of information out there about like clickbaity titles, and like there's formulas that we can put in there that will make people click, and that's not really what I want to do. There's this content creator, his name is George Gao. Actually, spelling is same last name as Cindy's, but I'm fairly certain they're not related. But he talks about how like he doesn't do like clickbait titles, and because he doesn't want his audience to like it just it hits on a different level. It's like a scarcity level. It's like you're trying to grab attention when you're really inviting them into a conversation. And so initially when I was thinking of doing the podcast, I was thinking of doing slashes for my title. So like for Cindy's, it might be friendship / motherhood / personal development, or Taima's might be money / mindset / travel. And I thought that would just be too confusing for the audience, frankly, for the listener. And so I've just kind of gone with general themes that I think a lot of the episode encompasses, and the thing that I would like for people to pay attention to.
Yeah. So after recording a whole season, congrats, by the way.
Thank you.
There's always a learning curve when starting something new, right? Podcasting is new to you. So is there anything specific that you tried out in season 1, but maybe weren't too happy with, that you would want to change about your process or the specific content as you continue to evolve and grow?
I haven't thought about it. I've been thinking a lot about season 2, and I haven't thought about what I would change so much. I really want to continue having guests. That is really the main reason I'm having this podcast. I have those solo episodes trickled in there because I do want to share a bit of my writing and kind of talk through my thoughts. Um, but I'm debating on whether I still have themes or if I just kind of go and just say, hey, it's going to be season 2. There's going to be, 10 guests and that's it. And go from there. What has worked is I like the hosting platform that I use. I have enjoyed having someone edit it for me. I've really enjoyed the guests. And I think I'm going to play around with like length of time, with the season. So it might not be those 10 episodes. It might not be 10 weeks. It might be 4 weeks. I don't know if anything hasn't really worked. I think that there are definitely things to improve upon at this point, but nothing to kind of scrap and throw away and because it hasn't worked.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's good to feel proud of what you've been doing and not absolutely ashamed of it. I've done some projects that I've been so ashamed of, but it's good that you're actually passionate about it and are liking what you're doing and plan to continue it. So, you kind of said that you don't have a full-on plan for season 2, but do you have any ideas of what you might want to do and what the audience can expect?
I have I don't know where my notebook is. I wrote something down. Oh, yes. This morning I was reading I was actually reading my notes from my previous first recording with Jeanette LeBlanc 3 or 4 years ago. And there was a one word in there, unlearning. And we were talking about like her great unlearning at that point. And I think that might be season 2's, it might be the theme for season 2 is unlearning. I'm actually going to have like a really short series about kind of like a year recap kind of deal. I have a class coming out in the end of January about the word of the year. And so I have a couple of guests kind of lined up for that and just do kind of a short series just to kind of prep for that class. And then after maybe in February, I'll have season 2 where I think it'll be about the great unlearning. We'll see, but that's kind of my latest thought right now.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
As we're wrapping up, you did remind me that I do ask all my guests a question. So I have to ask you.
Oh, no.
What is one thing you know to be true?
Everyone's answers have been like pretty deep and like meaningful, but I think I'll keep it lighthearted. I think what I know to be true is that your podcast is so awesome and I'm so proud of what you're doing and I'm so glad that I've gotten to be a part of it. And I know that you're going to do great things in season 2 and beyond that.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you for tuning in today. A great big thank you to Medfield TV for their support and editing this episode. Living an inspired life is a worthy endeavor. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Be sure to subscribe in your preferred podcast player for future real conversations. And if any part of this episode made you think of a friend, let them know that they aren't alone in their journey and share all the things with them. If you'd like to stay in touch, hop on over to lisaforreal.com and sign up for my daily blogs. Or find me on Instagram at Reclaiming Motherhood. See you next time.